Well, if you needed some help, you should have asked me.
Oh, good. Staple these.
You should have asked me yesterday.
There was never a closing episode of The Jeffersons.
Never was, and that's what I'm upset about until today. And I have said that publicly several times.
We would have gone on, except they canceled us. But they didn't want anybody to know they canceled us, so they never announced that we were canceled.
At 94, Marla Gibbs confesses forbidden secrets from The Jeffersons, a sitcom that made America laugh endlessly, yet stirred deep tensions among its cast.
So they figured rightly people would not know the difference. So they took us off, never said a word. We heard it from our friends, somebody who saw it in the paper. And so Isabel was upset to the day she died over that.
Marla risked her job to protect Florence's sharp voice. Sherman Hemsley carried a lonely burden off stage, and Isabel Sanford was blindsided by the show's abrupt end.
They called us in April, like in the middle of hiatus, and to say that we were canceled.
Let's delve in deeper. One of those truths was centered on Marla Gibbs herself. Long before she was recognized as the heart and sass of Florence Johnston, Gibbs had already developed a sharp sense for authenticity. She wasn't willing to let her character fall into lazy stereotypes or lines that didn't ring true. If a script didn't feel right, Gibbs would speak up, sometimes quietly, sometimes firmly, and insist on changes. This determination wasn't about ego. It was about respect for Florence as a believable black woman who deserved more than recycled jokes. At first, Florence was only supposed to appear in a few episodes. She was written as the maid who could trade barbs with George Jefferson, a role that seemed minor compared to the larger family dynamic. But Marla Gibbs's delivery was electric. Her wit, timing, and grounded presence resonated so strongly with audiences that she quickly became an indispensable part of the show. Fans loved her sass, and the writers were forced to bring her back again and again until she became a permanent cast member. Yet, with that elevation came responsibility. Gibbs understood that Florence wasn't just comic relief. She was a reflection of many working-class black women who were rarely given a voice on television. That weight pushed Gibbs to take her character seriously. She wanted Florence to be sharp, but also wise, funny, but also real. Writers, on the other hand, sometimes treated her lines as throwaway jokes. This led to friction.
It was.
When you got it and you got the star and everybody came out, it was like, I remember Kim Whitley and Anthony Anderson and Tisha Campbell.
Gibbs was known to linger after script readings when everyone else had gone home. She would review Florence's dialogue carefully, crossing out words, rewriting lines, and making sure that what came out of her mouth felt authentic. If she felt Florence's words sounded forced, she would go back to the producers and push for adjustments. These weren't screaming matches, but the persistence itself created tension. Writers had their vision. Gibbs had her lived experience. And between the two, compromises had to be made. Her insistence often raised eyebrows in Hollywood, where actors were expected to just say the lines. But Gibbs didn't back down. She understood that audiences weren't just laughing at Florence, they were connecting with her. She became a voice for viewers who knew what it was like to serve in wealthy households, or who recognized the sharp humor of a woman who had seen the world and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Off-screen, Gibbs's commitment to balance was just as inspiring. While working on The Jeffersons, she kept her day job as a United Airlines reservations agent for 2 years. She would spend her days helping passengers book flights and then head to the studio to exchange banter with Sherman Hemsley on set. This dual life showed just how grounded she was, even as fame began to circle around her. Marla Gibbs's story reveals that her clashes with producers weren't about rebellion. They were about respect. She knew Florence Johnston mattered, and in fighting for her authenticity, Gibbs not only shaped one of television's most iconic characters, but also carved out a legacy of strength, truth, and creative courage. If Marla Gibbs's battles with producers were about protecting authenticity, Mike Evans's struggle was about recognition. Evans, who played Lionel Jefferson, wasn't just another actor on the set. He was the original architect of Black family life on TV, having co-created Good Times alongside Eric Monty. Yet when it came to his role on The Jeffersons, Evans often felt sidelined and underappreciated. As the Jeffersons' only son, Lionel should have been central to the show's storylines. But instead of being the strong bridge between George's fiery temper and Louise's level-headed calm, Lionel was often pushed into the background. Week after week, Evans would arrive on set only to discover his lines had been cut down to a handful of forgettable remarks. For a man who knew the power of representation and who had fought to bring authentic Black voices to the screen, this was more than frustrating. It was humiliating. Behind the scenes, Evans clashed with producer Norman Lear, voicing his frustration at being sidelined. He believed Lionel was a character with untapped potential, one who could have represented the younger Black generation navigating a changing America. Instead, he was left standing quietly in the shadow of George Jefferson's booming presence. According to crew members, one heated confrontation escalated when Evans bluntly told Lear and the writing staff that he was being treated like furniture, visible but without a voice. This wasn't just actors' ego. Evans had lived through the struggle of getting authentic Black families on television in the first place. He knew how easy it was for networks to reduce Black characters to stereotypes or secondary figures, and he refused to let Lionel suffer that fate without protest. But pushing back came with consequences. His growing discontent and fiery exchanges with the producers made him a source of tension on set. By the end of season 1, Evans reached his breaking point. The combination of limited lines, ignored suggestions, and creative clashes left him disillusioned. He ultimately made the bold decision to walk away from The Jeffersons, shocking both cast and audience. His exit left a significant hole in the show's dynamic. Lionel had been designed as the balance, the young, educated voice who could go toe-to-toe with George, while also embodying the aspirations of a new Black middle class. Without him, that balance was lost. Evans's departure also marked one of the earliest shakeups for the Jeffersons, forcing the producers to recast Lionel with Damon Evans. No relation. But the ripple effects were clear. The original Lionel's authenticity and sharp presence were missed, and many viewers never fully embraced the new version. For Mike Evans, leaving the Jeffersons was both a stand for integrity and a painful loss. He had co-created television history with Good Times and had brought Lionel Jefferson to life with warmth and wit. But the battles behind the scenes reminded him of a harsh truth. Even in a groundbreaking sitcom, recognition didn't come easily. His exit underscored one of the recurring themes behind the Jeffersons. The laughter we saw on screen often masked the turmoil simmering just out of sight. When Mike Evans walked away from the Jeffersons, the producers were left with a problem. Lionel Jefferson was too important to simply erase from the story. The solution, they believed, was to recast. Enter Damon Evans, not related to Mike Evans, who was brought in to step into the shoes of George and Louise's only son. On paper, Damon Evans looked like the right choice. He was young, charismatic, and had stage experience, but in reality, taking over a role that another actor had already made iconic was an almost impossible task. From the moment Damon appeared on screen, fans noticed the difference. Mike Evans had played Lionel with a laid-back charm, a naturalness that made his sparring with George feel authentic. Damon, by contrast, often came across as stiff, like an outsider trying to fit into a family that wasn't truly his. What audiences didn't see was how much Damon himself struggled with the role. In later interviews, he admitted that he never felt comfortable playing Lionel. The pressure of stepping into someone else's character weighed on him constantly. He wasn't creating Lionel from scratch. He was inheriting someone else's work, and no matter how hard he tried, comparisons were inevitable. Even cast members, though professional, understood that the chemistry had shifted. Behind the scenes, Damon grew increasingly unhappy. He didn't feel that the writers were developing Lionel in meaningful ways. Just as Mike Evans had complained, Damon also saw the character being reduced to minor roles in the storyline. Week after week, he delivered lines that seemed more like filler than substance. For Damon, who had ambitions beyond television, this lack of fulfillment only deepened his frustration. The truth was, Damon Evans never truly wanted to be Lionel Jefferson. Unlike Mike, who had been deeply invested in the character's cultural significance, Damon viewed the role more as a stepping stone. He was a trained performer with hopes of a career in theater and music, and the sitcom world wasn't where his passion lay. That disconnect showed, both on and off screen. As seasons passed, Damon's dissatisfaction became more apparent. He openly admitted that he regretted ever taking the role. The pressure, the constant comparisons, and the lack of creative fulfillment left him drained. Eventually, he too exited the series, leaving producers once again scrambling to deal with the absence of Lionel. For fans, Damon Evans' time on The Jeffersons is often remembered as a transitional period, one where the family dynamic felt slightly off balance. For Damon himself, it was a reminder of how challenging it can be to inherit a role that doesn't fit, no matter how talented the actor. His departure underscored the fact that not all behind-the-scenes tensions came from fiery confrontations. Sometimes they came from quieter battles within, struggles with identity, purpose, and a longing for authenticity that television didn't always provide. In the end, Damon Evans' discontent revealed another hidden truth about The Jeffersons. Success on screen didn't always mean satisfaction for those living it. By the mid-1980s, The Jeffersons had become one of television's longest-running sitcoms, airing for 11 successful seasons. It was therefore a cultural landmark, a show that broke barriers and entertained millions. However, despite its success, the way it ended shocked the cast and left behind unresolved bitterness.
Several times.
Who are you most upset with about it?
I guess the network.
CBS.
Yes.
Isabel Sanford, who played Louise, Wheezy Jefferson, was particularly devastated. For more than a decade, she had poured her energy, heart, and loyalty into the show. Yet instead of receiving gratitude or a respectful farewell, she found out the series was canceled almost by accident.
There was never a closing episode of The Jeffersons.
Never was, and that's what I'm upset about until today. And I have said that publicly several times.
In fact, there was no phone call, no formal announcement, and no special meeting with the producers. Instead, the news simply trickled down, leaving Isabel blindsided. Because of this, Isabel felt deeply betrayed. She believed the cast had earned, at the very least, the dignity of a proper send-off. After all, the Jefferson family had become part of American households, week after week. But when she realized there would be no finale, no farewell, and no closure, she admitted she was furious. As a result, her sense of betrayal only grew, since the show had meant more to her than just another acting job. She later stated that she really hated to leave.
And I really hated to leave. Really hated to leave.
Meanwhile, Sherman Hemsley shared her disappointment, though he expressed it differently. For over a decade, he had given George Jefferson his loud voice, trademark walk, and unforgettable bravado. Yet off-screen, Sherman valued storytelling and believed fans deserved a fitting conclusion. Therefore, when the final episode aired in July 1985 as just another regular episode, Sherman was vocal about his dissatisfaction. He argued that a show as groundbreaking as The Jeffersons deserved more. Fans, too, felt cheated. Letters poured into the network, questioning why a series of such importance was not honored with a proper finale. Some argued that even though the show had been running for years, it still had more to give. Others insisted that the cast at least deserved recognition for their hard work. However, the network never reversed its decision, and the abrupt ending remained. As a result, the cast was left with mixed emotions. On one hand, they were proud of the legacy they had built. On the other hand, they felt discarded, as though all their years of dedication could be brushed aside overnight. Isabel Sanford's Outrage highlighted the raw pain of betrayal, while Sherman Hemsley's disappointment revealed the frustration of a storyteller denied closure. While Isabel Sanford and the rest of the cast were dealing with the abrupt end of the Jeffersons, Sherman Hemsley was carrying his own battles quietly. On screen, he was George Jefferson, the loud, fiery, and quick-witted character audiences adored. However, off-screen, Sherman was almost the complete opposite. In fact, he was shy, reclusive, and far more comfortable in solitude than in the spotlight. Because of this, many colleagues described him as mysterious. Whereas George Jefferson thrived on being the center of attention, Sherman often avoided it. He rarely attended Hollywood events, and instead, he retreated into his private world. Even though he was one of the most recognizable sitcom stars of his generation, he never sought the trappings of fame. Therefore, the contrast between George and Sherman created an unexpected tension, one that left fans surprised whenever they encountered him in real life. Moreover, playing such a brash character took an emotional toll. Sherman was, by nature, a gentleman. Yet, week after week, he had to channel George's arrogance and bravado. While this made him unforgettable on screen, it also left him drained. At times, he admitted it was difficult to separate himself from the role. As a result, George Jefferson's personality often overshadowed Sherman's own quiet identity. Meanwhile, his reclusiveness fueled endless rumors. Some assumed he was eccentric, while others believed he disliked Hollywood altogether. In truth, Sherman valued his privacy above all else. However, his choice to withdraw often deepened the loneliness he carried. At the same time, Sherman's discipline as an actor never wavered. He was professional, prepared, and respected by his peers. Yet, despite his success, he remained isolated. And because he avoided interviews and publicity, much of his personal struggle stayed hidden. In the end, Sherman Hemsley's life revealed a different kind of tension, one not born from heated arguments or sudden cancellations, but from the quiet struggle of a man caught between fame and privacy. Whereas George Jefferson demanded attention, Sherman longed for silence. And even though this conflict was less visible than the show's public controversies, it was perhaps more profound, because it shaped who he was long after the cameras stopped rolling. While Sherman Hemsley wrestled with private struggles, Roxie Roker faced a very different kind of tension, one that played out both on screen and in her real life. As Helen Willis, she portrayed one half of television's first interracial couple in primetime. This casting decision was groundbreaking, yet it also came with controversy. At the time, many viewers and even some executives doubted whether America was ready to see such a relationship portrayed on television. However, Roxie was uniquely prepared for the role. In fact, her own marriage mirrored her character's storyline. She was married to a white man, television producer Cy Kravitz, and together they raised their son, future rock star Lenny Kravitz. Because of this, Roxie brought not just skill, but authenticity to the character of Helen Willis. What she played on screen reflected what she lived every day, and therefore her performance carried a truth that no script alone could provide. Still, this groundbreaking step was not without challenges. Interracial relationships, even in the 1970s, carried stigma. Some critics voiced discomfort, while others praised the show for its bravery. Yet Roxie handled the tension with grace. Whereas others might have shied away from controversy, she leaned into it, believing representation mattered. She insisted that audiences needed to see families like hers on television. Moreover, Norman Lear, the show's creator, initially questioned whether the idea would be accepted by the public. Yet Roxie's determination and confidence helped push the storyline forward. As a result, Helen and Tom Willis became fan favorites, often serving as the calm, balanced counterpoint to George Jefferson's fiery personality. Their presence not only expanded the sitcom's humor, but also quietly challenged stereotypes and prejudices of the time. At the same time, Roxie's real-life role as a trailblazer carried personal weight. She knew that every scene she acted in could spark conversations or criticism around the country. Even though the cultural climate wasn't always welcoming, she stood firm. Her performance demonstrated that love and family transcended race, and in doing so, she used television as a platform for social progress. In the end, Roxie Roker's journey was one of courage. Her role on The Jeffersons reflected her personal reality, and together, they broke barriers for generations to come. And while her storyline didn't involve heated fights with producers or sudden cancellations, the societal tension she carried was just as profound, reminding audiences that comedy could also be revolutionary. As the story of The Jeffersons unfolds, we move from groundbreaking struggles to the quieter, more understated tensions. In this final layer, the focus turns to Nedra Volz, who joined the sitcom later in its run as Addie LaRue. Her presence brought a spark of humor and warmth, yet her role never quite grew into something larger. Compared to the explosive clashes of Mike Evans, the battles for authenticity led by Marla Gibbs, or Isabel Sanford's outrage over cancellation, Volz's tension was far more subdued. Nevertheless, it reflected a recurring issue in long-running sitcoms. Supporting characters sometimes slipped into the background, leaving questions about why they weren't given fuller development. For Nedra Volz, the limitation wasn't about talent. She had already proven herself a capable comedic actress, with impeccable timing and a quirky presence that audiences appreciated. However, her appearances remained scattered and brief. This suggests there may have been quiet behind-the-scenes decisions about which characters received focus and which didn't. Although these choices never escalated into dramatic confrontations, they shaped the rhythm of the show. Addie LaRue, despite her charm, became more of a side note than a central presence. Fans sometimes wondered why she wasn't given storylines of her own, particularly when her comedic energy seemed to fit well with the existing cast. This subtle sidelining stands in contrast to the bigger conflicts that rocked the show, yet it is still worth noting. It highlights how television production often involves not just dramatic disputes, but also quiet compromises. Not every actor who joined the Jeffersons was afforded the same spotlight, and Nedra Volz's limited role reflected those hidden calculations. In the grand arc of the Jeffersons, her tension may have been the smallest, but it still speaks to the complexity of ensemble casts, where choices made off-screen determine whose voices ring loudest in living rooms across America.